Good afternoon and welcome to the Praxis program. I'm Georgia Kelly, the director of Praxis Peace Institute. Today we are focusing on worker-owned cooperatives with Tim HUET and ADRIONNA FIKE. I want to tell you a little bit about each of them before we start with the interview. Tim HUET is a co-founder of the Arizmendi Bakeries that now comprise 6 worker-owned bakeries in the Bay Area, including the Cheese Board in Berkeley. He serves on the Boards of Arizmendi, his co-housing cooperative, and credit union. He's also an organizational consultant and attorney working with cooperative development. Tim has been a board member or board director of the U.S. Conference of Democratic Workplaces, and previously he was a member of the Rainbow Grocery Cooperative in San Francisco. And ADRIONNA FIKE is a marketing strategist with Black farmers and a member owner of Mandela Grocery Cooperative in Oakland. She's a board member of the Agroecology Commons and works with a network of Bay Area worker cooperatives, which is known as NOBOS. She has a degree in anthropology from Barnard College and a master's in public administration from the University of San Francisco. So welcome, Tim and ADRIONNA. It's great to have you with us here today.
Great to be here.
Great to be here.
So I'm going to start kind of alternating questions with both of you, and I'm going to begin with Tim. I'd like you to tell us about the formation, the beginnings of Arizmendi Bakeries. Where was the first one? And what was the first step? How did you actually come to decide that you wanted to do a worker cooperative with whoever else you worked with? And what was the process like of forming it back in the day?
Sure. We began with a study group that was looking at why cooperatives, worker cooperatives in particular, were much more vital in other parts of the world than the US. The US was kind of lagging behind. So we studied particularly the Basque cooperatives and the Italian cooperative movements. And we were trying to figure out what we could learn from them to apply back here and what had gone wrong with previous efforts. Looking at previous efforts back to the 1970s of people trying to import Mondragon to the United States, we thought they had tried to follow the model too closely, not look at the fact there's cultural differences here, and look at the fact that there's business differences here. So for instance, they were able to start during a period of war embargo in industrial things that they probably wouldn't be able to start in today. And people here in the United States were trying to build factory cooperatives in the 1970s, which was not really good timing. In our analysis, we thought that the cooperatives succeeded best when we were succeeding based on high skilled labor rather than based on capital. If you compete with capitalists based on capital, you're going to lose. So we tried to focus more on high skilled labor. So we started to look around for a business to start creating new businesses based on, and that was one of the things we learned from the Italians as well as the Basques, is they grew from success. If they had a successful business, they would figure out something they learned on the side of that business, and then they would create a new business and spin that off, and they would be trading with each other, but trading to outside as well. And when we looked around at the economy in the United States and what's working, what's expanding, what we saw was franchises and chains were really growing then. We happen to be the kind of people who hate franchises and chains, but just as we study other things in terms of conventional businesses that we might oppose, we decided let's study franchise and chains and see what makes them work, and is there anything we can take from them that could apply. So trying to take the Mondragon and the Italian lessons of starting with some success and growing, we said, let's look around for a successful business that we basically can kind of create an anti-franchise with. Basically a business that's controlled by the community stores rather than central headquarters telling everyone what to do. So what we wanted to have was shared services, central services without central control. We looked around and took us not very long to focus on the Cheese Board in Berkeley, both because they were a very successful business, but also that they had high customer throughput, because we were looking to create not just a laboratory and school for democracy, but also a democracy demonstration project. We wanted businesses that had a lot of customer inflow so that they would say, hey, your business is different. Why? And you've got a weird name. Why? Where's that name from? So it was an opportunity for us to do kind of experiential propaganda. So we went to them and we said, we studied your business. you're a cheese business, a bakery, and a pizzeria. And our own analysis is the cheese part of it's not really going to be where the expansion is. There's not really much room for that. We would like to make a business that focuses on the pizza side and the bread side. And they were very supportive. They said, we're not very interested in going out and creating a bunch of co-ops, but and we might not even have the right skill set for it, but we would love to support you doing it because we love what we have and we would love other people to have it. So they were very generous in allowing us to use their names for promotion and to train us in the recipes that they hadn't trained anyone else in before. And then we created our first one as Oakland Arizmendi Bakery in 1997. And as Georgia mentioned, we're up to 6 bakeries, and we also have a construction co-op and a landscaping cooperative now. And I'm part of the 9th co-op, which is the technical assistance cooperative, which is something we also try to learn from the Mondrian cooperatives and the Italian cooperatives, is you have to have technical assistance specialists in law and finance and education that really understand and support cooperatives.
Great, thank you, Tim. I mean, one of the things I'd like to do in Sonoma Valley, because we have a large Latino community in the Springs of Sonoma, and I think co-ops would be just perfect in that area. I've been trying to get educational panels there and to put them on somewhere where people can actually learn how this happens. So Adriana, I would like you to tell us a little bit about your background and how you became involved with Mandela Grocery and the network of Bay Area cooperatives. And also tell us a little bit about Mandela Grocery Cooperative. It's a very interesting place. And so explain to us what it is. And is there a consumer cooperative aspect to it, or is it just worker owned?
Wow. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it's a lot of questions, and you've hit a lot of points that are actually in motion right now. Speaking to the consumer cooperative aspect. But I'm Adriana. Tim, so great to hear that story. It's so inspiring, you know, and it kind of informs us on what we need to do to build out, you know, the grocery co-op network and sector that we want to see in Oakland and beyond. But yeah, I started working at Mandela Grocery Cooperative in West Oakland 10 years ago. The store was founded in 2009. So I was a customer for 2 years before I started working there. And it's just a great place. You know, it's a Black-owned, worker-owned grocery store, in which is still a food apartheid area, but, you know, we are an oasis with, you know, some people would call it a food desert. So we're the only grocery store within at least a mile radius. And we've built a really incredible community culture. You know, it's just been amazing to see how a grocery store can really build the culture of a community. You know, at first we were met with a lot of hesitation by the neighbors, mostly low income, Black and brown residents. And they're just like, what is this? You know, I don't recognize any of the products in the store. Like, what are y'all doing in here? Who do you work for? You know, it took so many days, so many years of saying, yeah, we own this store. They're like, you own it, but you're the cashier. You know, so just getting people to understand by experiencing, you know, us, what we have to offer. It's like, yes, this is all here for you. So just being a part of the community and being, you know, just founding an institution that's really, it's hard to talk about. It's more of an experience. You think about something mundane as a grocery store, but, you know, it just cuts really deep in terms of just the food. I'm sorry, I'm a little nervous. You know, food security, food sovereignty, you know, people coming in and seeing Black-eyed peas that were grown by Black farmers. People coming in and able to get collard greens that were grown by Black farmers. People coming in, being able to share with young folks about the stories of their, you know, of their traditions, what they cook, you know, having interactions with folks, looking at their baskets and asking them what they're going to do with that pie crust. So yeah. Can you remind me, if you give me another question? I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I will. I'm going to just alternate between you and Tim. Tim, I wanted to go back to something you touched on just moments ago, and that is the way the Arizmendi cooperatives are expanding by looking at, and this is something very similar to the Mondragon cooperatives. They always say the look for the need in the community. And then that's where they want to have a cooperative business or form another one. So you mentioned the construction cooperative and the landscaping cooperatives. Do you see, tell us a little bit about those, and then do you see branching out into any other areas of creating cooperatives in the Oakland area? Are you talking, Tim? Because we don't hear you.
Okay. So this was the decision our members came together and made. We presented the Development Support Cooperative study and said, it seems to us we have two different paths forward we can take. One is to go to other parts of the country, other metropolitan areas probably, and start creating more food cooperatives, bakeries essentially, because we have a huge demand. People call us from LA and Boston and everywhere else in between and say, could you bring your bakeries here? So that would be a possible way for us to go. And the other possible way to go would be to start diversifying ourselves in the Bay Area, and particularly business ventures that could support the existing co-ops. And the biggest challenge we face is housing. We pay much more than you would get in a typical food business. I just looked at the figures just for one of our highest paying bakery cooperative, which is actually not the cheese board. So just looking at Arizmendi, pays $53 an hour when you take into account pay and patronage and benefits. Whereas the average baker in California makes $11.50 an hour and has no benefits. So it's a huge success from a financial point of view. But even when you're making $40 an hour or $50 an hour in the Bay Area, it's actually very hard to compete for housing. If you didn't get here during a different era and maybe get one of those rent-controlled places or buy something before the prices came up too high, even if you're making $50 an hour, you're competing with people who show up with literal bags of money to a sale. So what we wanted to do was to go into construction and also have a design co-op, and our landscape cooperative is primarily a design cooperative. They'll actually implement the project as well. And then design housing specifically with underutilized land. So we have built a prototype, for instance, right now in Oakland. We went to someone and said, you know, you have 800 square foot in your backyard you're not using for anything. Let us come in here. We have a construction cooperative. We'll build the house. We'll manage it for you. We'll raise all the money. Won't take any money from you at all, but you'll get a share of the rent. So we're looking at ways to make our whole system more sustainable. We've meant from the beginning to go into all kinds of industries and essentially create a mutually supportive network of democratic businesses. But the housing crisis kind of pushed us that way a little quicker. So our members said, we want you to focus on those kind of things in the Bay Area, but also in the next 3 years, be working on a master plan for taking a whole suite of cooperatives to another regional area. So what happens sometimes is we'll open a bakery and it ends up helping gentrify the neighborhood, which is not something, it's something we feel a certain responsibility to counter. And we try to do that locally. But if we were to go to another city, what we would want to do is create a housing trust in the neighborhood we were going to go into. So we would get that housing and secure it for people who are already there before we could even touch off a gentrification cycle. We'd want to have our construction cooperative build our bakery and build and repair that housing. We'd want to have a landscaping cooperative who's training youth. So we really want to take a total systematic approach to development. And that's what we're trying to do in the Bay Area right now. We don't think our particular institution is going to take over the world. We've thought of ourselves as a demonstration project where we're hoping to inspire people in other regions anyway. But what we're trying to do is develop a interlocking system of cooperative institutions that could be imported someplace else.
Great. Love to have one of those bakeries in Sonoma. So Adrianna, I'd like to focus a little bit on your work with the Agroecology Commons to tell us what that is and what it does, and also your work with Black farmers. I do have another, yeah, let's just do that.
Okay, thank you. One question at a time. I think that's going to help me out.
Right.
So Agroecology Commons is a relatively new organization. I'll say they, and then I'll say we have been organizing for a couple years now. I'm a board member of the organization, and I'm there to provide just a cooperative spirit that's based in cooperative practice. I have spent a lot of time talking about cooperatives and my cooperative experience, especially building relationships and working on strengthening connections between people and in groups. And that is such a need, an urgent need, just people being able to face one another. So I think my role in that organization, which is focused on agroecology, so just beyond sustainable agriculture, really bringing in the political and the social aspects of land and food sovereignty, and really trying to strengthen Earth, the relationships between Earth and all of us, using a global political and social, lens. But what I bring, they're trying to formulate themselves, the collective members that run that organization are trying to really become a cooperative. So part of what they want to do in their succession process is become a worker cooperative, but now they're a collective that is stewarding and running farmer to farmer education and trying to figure out, like, with the farmers within their network, how to offer and sell produce and different products in grocery cooperatives in the Bay Area, and in the broader food shed in the region. And also, how to develop and sustain micro markets on and near their farms.
Right. So Tim, I want to go back with you about your visits to Mondragon. I know you've been there probably a few times, and I would like you to tell us what particularly inspired you about the Mondragon cooperatives in Spain, and maybe also the Italian cooperatives, which are a little bit different than Mondragon.
Well, what inspired me particularly about the Mondragon cooperatives is how intentional it was. Starting out as one person's idea, Father Arizmendi Arrieta, but who I think of as a genius, but his genius was not just like trying to come up with novel ideas. His genius was unlocking the genius of his whole community. And so he started with education, and as the kids got older and wanted to live out the values he taught, not just the technical things, he'd search for other things like cooperatives and brought those there, and really helped grow cultural institution that I think sometimes people think, oh, the Basque culture is really specific and something we can't replicate here. And I agree with that. But it's also, I think, the case that the fact they developed cooperatives was part of them retaining their culture. Father Arizmendi himself, he started a bank, and the original, and then kind of forced the co-ops to join behind it. There's a peculiar story there, but in any case, the interesting first slogan of that bank was invest your money or pack your bags, because he had learned from the cultures like the Irish culture that if you don't have your own economy, through no fault of your own in the case of Ireland, but if you don't have your own economy that you reinvest in, you will eventually be dispersed and have your culture destroyed. So we were really interested in that and what parts of co-ops we could draw on here, and starting from an educational institution, create more cooperatives that were also educational institution. And in terms of both Mondragon and the Italian cooperatives, we were very interested in the fact that they grouped up. Some people thought, oh, well, it's written right into the Spanish and Italian constitutions that they're interested in co-ops and they have really favorable laws, but they didn't take into account that those cooperative movements actually started under fascism and helped overthrow fascism and rebuild after fascism. And that's why they got written into law. It wasn't that the law was there first. It was that they became so successful and unignorable that the institutions got built for them. But one of the particularly interesting things they wrote into the law is a requirement to reinvest in education, as well as to create funds for other co-ops. So for instance, the Italian cooperatives, they essentially voluntarily tax themselves 3% of their surplus to go into a fund to create other cooperatives. So they start out with their strong areas of cooperatives, but then they create these funds that can then go down to Sicily and create cooperatives in southern Italy where they're not as popular. So they take their existing resources and they make sure to invest them and continuing to grow rather than just saying we're happy with our success in this one valley.
Right. You mentioned about the university or the educational aspect, and the Mondragon Cooperatives have 3 university campuses. So those are also worker owned. I'm not quite sure how it all works, but they are worker owned. They have 3 universities, 1 focused on engineering and science and 2 on business. And they have a teampreneur program also, which is some of the young people at the university are learning how to create co-ops by part of their education is to create co-ops in groups of 8 people. So they create businesses while they're still students. So I wanted to go back to you, Adriana, and have you talk about the Black New Deal Symposium that just was held in Oakland last month. And that looked really impressive for a lot of reasons. So I'd like you to tell us a little bit about that symposium and what the focus was and what is ahead for it, what came out of it, or is, I guess, looked at as a possible outcome for it too.
Yeah, so there wasn't a date stamp on that. It did say February. It was actually February of last year that happened.
Oh, okay. That's okay. We still want to hear about it.
Yeah, we have in the district where Mandela Grocery Cooperative is in West Oakland is District 3, and our city council person's name is Carol Fife. And Carol ran on a platform somewhat, of wanting to support cooperatives. And the organizations that she's a part of, they do a lot of work in uplifting West Oakland community. And so she reached out to me to ask if I was willing to talk about cooperatives as part of, community economic development and how we need to be more neighborhood and just neighborhood specific about what our needs are and how we organize. So, I was a part of a conversation. It was an interview sort of like this. And I talked about, what cooperatives need, talked about non-extractive financing to the extent that I know what that is and what that really means and how we can access that. And also just what we do at Mandela, like really starting to, in the thick of the pandemic, understanding the term mutual aid, like, hearing that term a lot and us thinking because we are giving that we are, practicing mutual aid, but trying to suss the mutuality in that process. So talking about that and grappling with that in that conversation. And that conversation prompted me, because I was part of the conversation representing Mandela Grocery Co-op and the West Oakland cooperative economic sort of ethos and thought as I could synthesize it, but got me thinking about how we can incorporate a consumer cooperative element in Mandela. I'm actually currently working on a proposal to have people think about that, like how are we going to sustain our business, throughout this waves of gentrification. The West Oakland BART station across the street from our store is developing. So what does that look like when, competing forces are right across the street? Will we move over there? Will we be forced to grow in some type of way that doesn't feel quite right for our group? So thinking about a consumer aspect, integrating consumers into our membership model, what that could look like. So just, the symposium brought up a lot of questions on what's happening in West Oakland and impacting West Oakland is going to serve and support Black residents in West Oakland, especially low-income folks, and you know, our members? How are we going to be able to pay that rent in West Oakland over time? Because we're being squeezed out of there right now. Like I consider myself, I don't want to say a product of of gentrification, but I was forced out. And luckily, fortunately, I wound up in a place that's really beautiful, but you know, I had to go. Someone was like, "Oh, your landlord sold the house. You got to go." You know, and that's happening for folks on our team. You know, people are like stressing because they're forced to live in places that isn't dignified. So it's like, how are we speaking, you know, dignity of workers and paying paying $20 an hour, which that's what we can afford to pay right now. But folks are like, I'm not living in dignified housing, but I'm trying to embody this, you know, dignified worker presence at work. So there's a lot of forces that are driving us to consider, you know, how are we going to sustain ourselves? How is the life of Mandela, you know, what is the life of Mandela going to be 10, 15, 20 years from now? Given, you know, we're in this grocery game with a lot of huge forces within this food system that's kind of like not supportive. So thinking about Agroecology Commons, thinking about housing co-ops, thinking about just all the ways that we need to build together so that we're able to support one another, you know, really build out an ecosystem that is supportive of poor Black people. Because once Black folks are served, poor Black folks are served, everyone is being served. I really believe that. So, you know, just constantly thinking about, you know, a New Deal policy-oriented planning that is, you know, deeply participatory. You know, it's like we think about democracy at work, and when we reflect on that at Mandela, it's kind of like, what does democracy mean? Like, what has it meant for us throughout the history of this country? Like, what is democracy really? So we're, you know, building power and thinking about what that looks like for us, because it doesn't look like what history has taught us. So, you know, figuring it all out. So that's the New Deal. And thinking about the education piece that you spoke of, Tim, and reflecting on Mondragon. Like before we got on, I asked, like in Mondragon, like how is, you know, primary, secondary education structured? How is it there? Because I feel like that's a huge gap here. Like Oakland, there isn't education focused on cooperative behavior, really, like, you know, leading folks to have the confidence to deeply participate in conversations about how to govern themselves or how to manage themselves. So even out of the economic realm, but just like relating to one another. So I'm thinking about jumping back into that sphere. And I'm like, do I go into public education? Do we need to have alternative schools? Is it Montessori? Like, how can poor Black children access these resources of education, you know, to lead us to a place where they're able to participate fully in cooperative jobs of the future? So there's a whole lot in this Black New Deal that is still yet to be discussed and addressed, but it's an ongoing conversation. And, you know, that happened last February, but you called me to reach out to continue this conversation in West Oakland and with Carol. We need to.
It looked very impressive.
A living New Deal.
It looked really interesting online, the topics that were discussed and looked at in that symposium. I wanted to mention that in the primary schools in the Basque region that are part of the Mondragon area, they learned conflict resolution in grade school, something we never learn at all here. And it helps with relationships, learning how to respect difference. It begins very early, and we don't have any of that training here, which I think is unfortunate. And when you mentioned about the consumer cooperative aspect of the grocery store, the Eroski supermarket chain, which is a Mondragon worker-owned chain of grocery stores in Spain, they're now all over Spain. They also have a consumer cooperative element of it. So they have both consumer not worker owners, but consumer owners, and they have then the worker owners. So they have both aspects of it, which might be something that you would be interested in looking more at. So what I'm going to do now is open this up for questions from people on the call, or comments, or anything that people might want to bring up. I'm looking for, usually it takes a minute or so before they have their questions, which means I might jump in with some more. I don't see them. I think, you know what, oh, Kevin, did you have your hand up?
Yes. Tim, you made a comment early in your presentation that capital made it very difficult for co-ops to compete with capitalism. Could you elaborate some more on that comment?
Sure. Well, one way it's happened in the United States specifically is co-ops tend to develop a new industry, organic grocery. That was developed almost exclusively by consumer and worker cooperatives in the grocery industry. But for various cultural factors as well as financial factors, they weren't all that interested in expanding. So finally, someone from Texas was like, hey, you create a nice business model. Thank you very much. I'm going to scale it up and run you all out of business. So if we don't take a more active role in growing, we are basically going to be overrun by capitalist businesses. In fact, the best hope we have is to grow just in a local level enough that they're like, oh, we won't bother trying to put coffee shops there or bakeries or grocery stores there because there's easier neighborhoods for us to take over. Or what we need to do to a certain degree is take parts of the economy that capitalism is abandoning and say, where we're going to fill those niches. And as time goes by, capitalism will be probably abandoning more and more of our communities. That's an opportunity for us actually to go into places that they don't see as good markets. The problem is you can go into a market and actually turn it around in a way that they say, oh, now we want to come back in and compete with you. So we have to be very savvy about the fact that if you're going to develop in a neighborhood, you should develop in a way that is going to make you less open to capitalist competition.
Good point. You know, speaking of that, the Arizmendi Bakery that's in San Rafael came in under strong competition with two other cafes like that, or on the same street, actually, on 4th Street in San Rafael. And I know there was some problem with that particular business, but it was helped by some of the other ones in the Arizmendi cooperatives. I'd like you to say something about that, because that was coming into an area that already had a concentration of shops like that.
Sure. Yeah, we went into that development with some hope and trepidation at the same time. The Berkeley food co-op system, the consumer cooperatives, they partially died because they tried to go in Marin and they didn't really understand the cultural differences, and they lost a lot of money in those businesses. So some people were saying like, oh, you shouldn't try to develop co-ops in Marin. And our view was there's definitely cultural undercurrents that will support co-ops. We just need to frame it in a way that makes sense locally there. The other side of it was we were developing that particular co-op after the 2008 financial crisis. And so that argument went both ways. It's like, well, go where people still have more money. But on the other hand, it was a difficult place for us to go to because our business relies on a huge flow of customers. And when you have people who have more money but less urban density, then that's a bit of a challenge. So we knew we might have to adjust. And that's always our approach, is to come in and not try to do the same business every place, but to adjust to the local culture and needs. But the other thing we found ourselves running up in a challenge is the people who came out. We have a very odd model of developing a business. We actually rent the space, we get the financing, we've incorporated the business before we actually recruit any of the people who are going to be the founders. And we've created a temporary board that's veteran bakers from the other bakeries and members of the Development Support Cooperative until we can turn the business over to them, which is about 7 months in. And since we only recruit them 4 months before the doors open, even when the business opens, there's no one there who's going to be a long-term owner. So there's reasons why we do that, but there's also some dangers with that. And one is that if you recruit a group.
You're on mute, Tim.
Did I just go mute? That was very strange.
By accident.
So it was the thing that happened there was it was the first time we went in to recruit members and they just assumed we were going to succeed. We usually had to go into new neighborhoods and like make an argument why it can succeed, and with our support it can prosper. And that was the first group where we came to and they just assumed we were going to succeed. So when they started to have some troubles at the beginning, instead of trying to adapt and say, oh, we have to adapt to this different market and different culture, they just started pointing their fingers at each other and blaming each other, which is what, since we don't get taught conflict resolution in school, but we get taught basically complain about other people, you don't have any no power, so you might as well just complain about other people and tear each other down. Those kind of things happen before you can kind of develop a different kind of culture, cooperative culture. So that's what's happened with that group, that were very new people. They just started to blame each other instead of like figure out what we could do differently. Even though the Development Support Cooperative came up with an analysis of what they would have to do to make it succeed, and that eventually did turn out to be the case. But there was so much infighting that at a certain point we said to the members, we think some of the newer people you've hired are actually pretty good, but the founders are into such a conflict with each other that we think you all need to leave and we need to start with new workers. The only way we were able to do that is we were able to get veteran bakers from the Oakland bakery, from the cheese board in Berkeley, from San Francisco, to go up there and help work shifts and to donate, to put money into them. So it's the first time that a cooperative, to my knowledge, in the United States has been rescued by another cooperative network. And we're really following the Mondragon and Italian models, where if a co-op gets in trouble, they rally around it and they help relaunch it. And now it's a very successful cooperative. So I wasn't sure we were going to have that solidarity when we adopted our principles, but it really did prove out in that case.
It was wonderful to see that. I go, when I'm in Marin, I always go to that Arizmendi Bakery, which I really like. Do we have other questions, comments? While we're waiting, I'm going to mention something. Oh, wait a minute. Kevin, did you have something else you wanted to ask?
Yeah, I was curious as to whether Adriana or Tim had any opinion about government support for the development of co-ops. Is there government support? I know there's a small business administration loans, but are there other mechanisms that people might rely on governmentally to get support to develop their co-ops?
I'll say that currently I'm a part of a group that's organizing to build power, to get some, I guess, to motivate the city of Oakland to support co-ops more robustly. So I was a part of a group that organized to help get a progressive business tax in Oakland on the ballot, and it succeeded. So it is, you know, the big businesses are going to have to pay more in taxes. But how these funds are distributed hasn't been decided yet. So we're trying to come up with a plan so that cooperatives are getting some of those funds to support ourselves. The city council, we met with the city council president, this group that I'm organizing with. I think, were you there at that meeting, Tim, with Nikki Fortunato Bass?
No.
I don't think you were. So we met with the city council president. It was a big open conversation on Zoom, and she was outright advocating for co-ops. She was like, we need to, the city needs to better understand cooperative needs. She said, this is a progressive city council that we have right now. So this is the time to act. So we're actively, you know, organizing and trying to put things on the table, you know, attending their town hall meetings this season, as they prepare to, you know, map out the budget to get some things in there that are that's prioritizing worker cooperative. So this is a prime time in Oakland where we need to sort of organize and have some clear requests from the city about what we need, who we are, and what we need. So that's happening.
Thank you. One of the things that both of you have really stressed in your responses have been the problem of affordable housing. And this is just becoming a worse and worse problem. We're dealing with it here in Sonoma County because so many of the people who are working in especially the service industries cannot afford to live here. They have to commute. And the commuting is not only stressful for the people who are having to do it, it's costly in terms of gas, it's bad for the environment, and it breaks up community. So if either of you have anything you would like to see happen around, I guess some solutions to housing, do you have any ideas of that, of where we might go next to try and deal with this serious problem? Or are we all stuck here?
The only thing I look at the situation and I become a little bit overwhelmed by it. The displacement that's happening, you know, what you mentioned with the construction industry, which we work with now, there's people sometimes driving in from the valley to work. They try to get a couple hours sleep and then they drive back. So it's not only all those other things that you mentioned that are bad, but it's also dangerous, dangerous to their health and to the health of anyone who's on the road with them. So we're really looking at what's called workforce housing and how can we build more workforce housing, because the market is not taking care of that. If anything, it just wants to build luxury condos. And it's certainly the existing housing stock is not available to you if you're competing against people who make 4 or 5 times more than you do. So instead of just being depressed about it and overwhelmed, we're looking for opportunities. And there are definitely people that we've got in our community because they're customers of ours, customers of Mandela, you know, that were just like, oh, we see a different world. We see a little bit of a different world. And yeah, if I could house one of your workers who would pay me a fair rent and you'll build the housing, we'll do that. So those are the kind of things I think we need to look at. There are definitely situations. I happen, Diane, I'm interested in reading your book. I live in co-housing, and we have to take spaces that other people might not want and then create them into little urban oases. So I think that's an opportunity as well. But we have to be, and there's a group in the Bay Area called the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative that is buying existing houses, often people who are ready to sell their house and they're not trying to make a killing on it. They're just trying to make their money back or have enough money that they can move someplace else once they sell. So there are people looking at how we do this, but it's all about, you've got to have the skills to compete as well. So we're trying to learn real estate, we're trying to learn construction so that we are able to do those things. This kind of goes back to a larger theme that I maybe hinted at before, which is, you know, a lot of the people in the 70s, I read Schumacher's book, Small is Beautiful, very inspired by it. But I think people sometimes take it too far, which is small is the only thing that you should do. And if that's the case, then we're going to stay marginal as well, because small is also marginal. If we want to develop and serve all of society's needs, we're going to have to figure out how to create housing. We're going to have to create how to manage housing. And a lot of times, people who I talk to, some of my best friends, they're like, oh, I don't want to get into that because I would be a landlord. Well, if you're not going to be a landlord, then you're going to leave yourself at the prey of who is willing to be a landlord and has no moral compunction about it. So for us, we need to move into those areas of our community that are important, and land sovereignty is I think applies in this context as well, in terms of like, if you have businesses in the community, but you don't own land and you don't control housing, then you don't really have a sustainable economy.
This is kind of frightening. Ned, you wanted, or did you want to say anything, Adriana, before I went to the next question?
No. Wow. Right.
You covered a lot. Okay, Ned, you're next.
Yeah, I'm just popping in. I don't have anything really great to offer, but the little I know about the Mondragon cooperatives through George's work is so inspiring. At the same time, my work lately has all been on climate, how do we, climate change and ecological restoration, regenerative businesses, that kind of thing. It seemed, wow, the cooperative concept fits in that somehow if we can just get it started. So complicated starting new businesses, but there's going to be, if we're really serious about altering our culture and especially our grounding on this planet, the way we live on this planet, in a way that will allow all of life to survive, there's going to be massive investment to make the needed changes. And if that work can be done through cooperative business arrangements, more and more that way, like the co-housing kind of thing that I know George is setting up programs on that to create the space for workers and so forth. They're great places to live. Anyway, it seems like there's going to have to be major transformation. And if the work can be done through these, through the avenue of the cooperative arrangements, it just seems that it's so congruent with what we're trying to do. But so I just leave it here. What's possible here? Can we grow into things and have different groups supporting each other? They're aligned mentally the same with kind of a cultural new framework, and we're taking care of each other, all races, all cultures, but pulling together somehow, bringing things back together. That's secretly, I'm just on the science side of it, but it doesn't work unless there's real compatibility and pulling together that we're on the same team. And cooperative is teamwork, it sounds like. So I'll just stop there. And
I want to just tell them that Ned is very involved. He lives in Petaluma and is very involved with environmental work there, but also there's this cool Petaluma that's an organization there. And I think Petaluma is a place where a lot of what we're talking about could actually flourish because there's a lot of community commitment to this kind of change. And they all kind of hang out at this cafe. The Aquas Cafe is the place where it all happens there. So there's always a place like this where people can go and talk and meet with other people who think like they do. And the Aquas Cafe is that place. And it might be a good place to have both of you come and talk sometime, because I think it's a community that is very ripe for this kind of information. What do you think, Ned? Do you think that's true?
Oh, I'd love to see it happen. I'm sure we could organize that.
That's what I thought.
Get some good food too for you.
Yeah, they'll feed you really good food. They have good food there. It's kind of a community hangout, this place. So
yeah, that's how Mandela is. You talked about like this mental shift. Like it really is a matter of consciousness shifting. You know, it's consciousness, having a place to share ideas and talk, to struggle together, you know, to really sometimes complain to one another, like that's necessary. Yeah, and I will add, Mandela is, I've only had experience in a worker cooperative at Mandela, but it's a very spiritual group with different spiritual traditions. You know, it's not a monolith. But like people are really, it's a devotion, you know, like, yes, it's a commitment, but people are like deeply committed to that seventh principle, which is concern for community. And people consider themselves, even though some of us don't live in West Oakland anymore, like we are of community. So really having a deep place-based devotion to, you know, the next generation of the folks living in West Oakland could be that the person in the womb of the person who just walked in the store. You know what I mean? We think about these kids as being potential members of this co-op in the future. So how are we acting? What is our presence like? You know, and people are like, y'all are such good role models. That's why I love bringing my kids in here when I come to shop. You know, and they pick up the vegetables, ask questions. Sometimes the little kids run behind the cash register, you know, and we let them explore. And a lot of folks from and in West Oakland don't get that experience, don't have anything remotely to that experience when they go into a retail establishment. It's kind of like, what are you doing here? They have a total different experience. So I think that the experiential component, the consciousness, being able to connect, the healthy products or the healthy retail with the way that the folks who work in the space are treating you. So it's really, comes back down to the way that we treat each other. And it really, you can feel a type of devotion and a type of deep care when you have that type of stable business in your community for over a decade, and you're growing up with that. But definitely, businesses like the cafe in Petaluma, like we just need increasingly more of a presence of just the conscientious conversations happening in those spaces, and people are meeting and knowing that that's the place that they can go to receive that sort of relief. That's different from all the, different type of businesses that they encounter. Disrupt some of that rampant consumer chaos that a lot of folks experience when they go into places to buy things like food.
If I can add, I think there's a real community hunger for that. I always say about our bakeries, we produce bread, but our primary thing we produce is hope. Most people, they don't read a book or see a documentary and then change their life. They have to have an experience that makes them ask questions, that makes them want to go read about it or experience more about it. But a lot of the younger people growing up, and people including in my generation, they see the problem, but they don't really have a tangible hope. And so cooperative businesses, I think, create that for people. And for me, I actually gone into this as an accidental business person. I was mostly concerned from an ecological point of view. From a teenager, I could see that capitalism depends on growth, and that was a cancer that was going to destroy our economy. So if you can try to control your consumption and try to make that more responsible, that's true. But the actual biggest problem is the production mode. Mm-hmm. So we actually have to have worker co-ops, to me, as part of the solution, because they are not actually oriented towards growth. They are actually oriented towards stabilizing and serving their own community. But that's a challenge in the meantime if you're competing with capitalism, because just like the human body, when we're competing against a cancer, that unnatural system can bring down the whole homeostasis. So we have to figure out a way of creating an ecology of institutions that support each other, businesses, education, advocacy groups. And that's why I'm excited about convocations like today.
Great, yeah. Jerry, did you have something you wanted to say?
One opportunity which we may still have for promoting the kind of mutual and supportive community that has been beautifully discussed here today is at the Sonoma Developmental Center land. I mean, that was the original concept for some of us when we first started talking about it. Stephanie Hiller had really drafted a wonderful proposal for what she called an eco village. And, then the other forces of capitalism came in and it looked like they were going to prevail, but now there's a lawsuit, which I think will prevail and defeat the current plan. So it's a perfect place to do exactly the kind of community building if the priorities are right, and we can get away from people just trying to exploit it as just another wine country money-making machine. So in any event, I really enjoyed the wonderful presentation, and I think we might have a chance to do some experimenting, maybe not immediately, but within a few years at the Sonoma Developmental Center land.
Yeah, the Sonoma Developmental Center, for both Tim and Adriana, who wouldn't know about this probably, it's a 954-acre piece of land. And it's huge. And it used to be where people, what they call developmental centers, people who were developmentally challenged lived there. And they had healthcare, nurses, doctors, but it was closed by the state a few years back. And the recent proposal for it was just horrendous. It was to make all these new housing units, like 1,000 new houses and condominiums, and with a very small percentage of affordable housing. And first of all, the one Highway 12 that goes through that area can't handle another 1,000 houses there. So just ecologically, it's a disaster. But I think if this can be reconfigured, it would be a great place to try some new things. But it's going to take our government to be our city, not city, but county supervisors to be on board as well. So I want to end this with suggesting that maybe we recreate this conversation at the Aquas Cafe in Petaluma sometime with a whole different group of people live. I think it'd be great because I think it's a community that could learn something from it, do something with it, and take it to use it in the community. It could go somewhere there more than in Sonoma. Unfortunately, I think Mike will have one last comment or question.
No, Mike. Just a real quick comment. I mean, first of all, it was really great. Just wanted to thank you both. It's funny. It's like a lot of things in life. It's a lot more complicated than I realized. I never really gave it all that much thought. I used to live almost right next door to the Arizmendi Bakery when I lived up in Santa Fe. And I think I probably went in there every day of the week. I loved the place. I think they were closed one day. But that, to me, that was the best place on 4th Street. I mean that. It was just a great place. And the people were all just, it was just a different kind of a place. But the way you both explained this all today, and with all the legal stuff and the landlords and where people live and race and culture, and honest to God, I never really gave it all that much thought. And there's just so much to this. And you both did a really great job of explaining it. So I really appreciate that. That's basically all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Mike. And thank you both, Adriana and Tim, for spending the time with us today. This has been really exciting and interesting. And I think it's given us a lot more to think about how we can change the world for the better.
Great. I want to add something.
Sure.
I got to co-ops initially. I was a basketball player in elementary school all the way through college. And I'm really excited. There's a really good women's college basketball game about to start at 6 between Iowa and South Carolina. So if you have ESPN, you might want to check out that game and see some cooperation and action at a really high level.
Get out of here. That's beautiful. I played basketball half my life. It was my life for a long time.
That's right. Yeah,
excellent.
Get a lot of people in the co-op. That's one of my future things. I want to start an organization that is a pathway for student athletes to get into worker co-ops because they know how to work hard. They know how to work in teams. They know how to strive to win.
Great idea, Adriana. I'm going to stop the recording.